Blog Talk Radio, the world's largest online radio network.
Welcome, everybody, to Fantasy Football Tonight. I'm your host, Todd the True Guru Farino, and, of course, as always, I will be joined by my co-host, Mr. RC Rizza. We're going to have a pretty nice show planned for you today with all sorts of amazing fantasy football talk, if you know what I'm talking about. Before I get into, of course, the whole show, I want to remind you that we have the Fantasy Football Tonight Blog Talk Radio Listener League. We had 4 signups come through from the last show. I believe we have 4 spots left. I'll probably consider expanding it to 14 teams. We got 4 spots left, so if you'd like to get into that, just email me at todd@fantasyfootballfetch.com, or, of course, you can email RC as well at junkyardjake@yahoo.com, but probably better to go todd@fantasyfootballfetch.com, and we will get you into the league. 4 spots left. It's a highly competitive league. We had 2 leagues last year. We will open a second league up if demand gets crazy, which it tends to around this time. People start coming in. So just go ahead and get your bids in now. If we do go to a second league, we'll likely open up the second league as we've done the last 2 years. Also, don't forget, visit fantasyfootballfetch.com. We just got that site redesigned. It used to be Fantasy Football Search. If you go to fantasyfootballsearch.com, it'll take you right there, of course. We tried to build a little bit more user-friendly site. We really wanted to get the fantasy manager's input on the sites you use. We have a lot of sites in our directory. Find your favorite site. If it's not in there, certainly submit it or email, go to the contact page and let me know of a site that you'd like to see in there so we can get it in there for you. We'll do that right away. And then leave reviews. And every month we're giving 3 $50 prizes for anybody who registers and then leaves a review. All you got to do is leave one a month, and you'll be eligible for the prize, $50. 3 of them. We'll be handing them out starting in August because the site just launched now, so that will happen through August. So, but if you leave a review in July, that will qualify as well. All right, well, we're going to get to the news, of course, of everything that's going on in the world of fantasy football. It's been a little bit crazy a week. I mean, sometimes you got to slap your mom. Listen, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to pretend like I'm going to defend my boy, Des Bryant, but sometimes you got to put your mom in your place. If I did that to my mom, an Italian mom, I probably wouldn't be talking right now. I'd probably have my jaw wired shut. So how he got away with it, maybe it's because he's a 6'+", huge, 3% body fat, wide receiver. Who knows? But that's Des Bryant for you. That was a little bit of the news. I'm going to wait to get into the remaining news until I can get RC in the show. But we're going to open up the show with a little bit of draft strategy talk because I think I don't know for sure how much this is covered in the podcast world of fantasy football because I really don't listen to any other podcasts except for my boy Jeff Bogus. But I'll tell you this right now. By the way, he does a podcast, FantasySportsEmpire.com. Please check him out. Tell him Todd sent you, and he'll give you a huge hug, and if you're a girl, a kiss in the cheek. All right? All right, you can hear about that. All right, so here we go. Draft strategy. Now, I know RC is going to come in on this, and he's going to debate me on it, but for years, I've kind of ran off a philosophy. I wouldn't say for years. I'd say for the last couple of years. I ran off a philosophy, and as many have, of draft, make sure you draft well for the playoffs. Make sure you look at your starting quarterback and, make sure he has a decent schedule in the playoffs. I mean, that is always, critical. And, but this year I've looked at, and especially after some of the experiences that we had last year, I've kind of come to a different conclusion. And it's a 2-pronged conclusion. Let me see, do we have RC yet? Good. So maybe I should keep him muted so he can't argue. No, he can argue. I'm just kidding. RC, what's going on?
Hey, what's up?
All right, I'm about to get into our opening conversation about draft strategy. By the way, if you're in the chat room and you have a question, we won't necessarily break right out of character to answer the question, but we will definitely get to it as soon as an opening becomes. So please post your questions in the chat room. Eventually this stuff gets really busy, but we always make sure we get to all of them. All right, anyway, so here's the 2 things I want to talk about with draft strategy, because everyone's getting ready. Drafts are getting ramped up. Some have already started, I'm sure, but really, RC, when we get into August, that's when the drafts really get hot and heavy. And here's my problem with the draft strategy of drafting for the playoffs, okay? In my opinion, now, I mean, again, I'm gonna pat myself on the shoulder a little bit. I'm gonna talk myself up a little bit. But last year I was in 6 leagues and made the playoffs in all 6 of them. That's how I roll, RC. I won 3 of them, but I made the playoffs in all 6 of them. And I realized last year, I mean, I've always known this, but it really dawned on me. It's like it is a lot harder to get to the playoffs than it is to actually win in the playoffs. Or because it's, you got 12, 14 games, whatever your league plays, that or 13 or whatever it is, depending on your playoff system, that you have to play through just to make the playoffs. And then you have a three-season playoff. So my point is that forget the playoffs. Forget them. Not forget them forever. Don't worry about them as much during the draft. Hey, if you can make that choice, if you can sit here and say, yeah, you know what, wow, I want to take this quarterback because he has a skate season in the playoffs, I would not worry about that anymore. And here's my case in point, and then the second point I'm sure we'll agree on, but then I want you to rebut this if you don't agree. Here's why I say do not consider the playoffs. Number one, if you're not there, who cares, right? Okay, there's number one. If you're not there, who cares how good your quarterback's going to do in the playoffs? Because if you don't make it there, you don't make it there. Number two, that team, your quarterback might play the Steelers in the first round, but that Steeler team can be beat up in garbage come week 14. Okay, so you know what I mean? I've seen it happen before, and plus that quarterback could be, so seasoned at that point in the season and just firing all cylinders. It won't matter what team he's facing week 14. He's going to beat them. Also, if you plan for the playoffs and you have, say, for example, Peyton Manning from 2010, all of a sudden he's not even playing. So who cares what team he's playing? I mean, that's a totally different strategy. I know, RC, I'm making a kind of a different strategy because we always have to plan for the 15-1 Aaron Rodgers teams, the 15-1 old school Peyton Manning teams. But, I mean, the reality of it is that you need to get there. And the way you get there is by drafting for the season, and then anything can happen in the playoffs. So that's going to be the first point. And then the second point is, and this one I think you'll kind of agree with this, I'm going to have a focus this year on drafting the best available players when it comes to the deeper part of the draft, and not just going, oh, I better have 4, running backs, or let me grab, this guy. No, get the best available, because I guarantee, RC, you might end up with 6 wide receivers on your roster. Odds are with injuries and bye weeks, you might use them all. And, and also, secondary point, odds are you're going to cut them anyways. But it's better to get the best available players than it is to say, I better make sure I have, 4 running backs. I mean, certainly cover your position. But if there's a very good sleeper wide receiver out there and a so-so running back, I'm going to say go for the very good wide receiver because odds are you're going to need that depth in the season. So let's cover the first point. Do you disagree with me on drafting for the playoffs?
Well, yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before, but the challenge for drafting for the playoff, it's easier to even say that you're going to do it than to actually do it. So while you're drafting in no matter what, format or context or, basically, I think if it's a live draft or even like an email draft, of course, you have more time to look at things like this, but say it's like a, more spontaneous draft, there's usually no possible way that you're even going to consider drafting for the playoffs. However, I do agree with you that it should not be like a primary consideration, but like we've discussed before, I think if you were faced with a choice between 2 close alternatives in terms of, like a certain position, like there's probably a good example this year with going around late second round or mid-second round, DeMarco Murray versus Jamal Charles, for example. They're going around the same spot, around spot 20 in drafts this year. And when you look at DeMarco Murray, he's got basically a brutal schedule versus the run. At least, judging from how these defenses played last year. Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, and New Orleans. Now, New Orleans is going to be weaker this year in most likelihood, but even so, that when you look at like that, and this is weeks 14 through 16, so he's got to face those 3 defenses, and then Jamal Charles, who's going around the same point, he has an absolutely cake schedule against the run: Cleveland, Oakland, and Indianapolis. So if you had some way of actually, if these were 2 players that you were targeting and you were faced with a choice between these 2 players, and you're a little biased towards DeMarco Murray perhaps, both these players are very similar. I mean, they're very dynamic when they're healthy. They're difference makers. and they're also vulnerable to injury. So I mean, these guys are very, very similar, I would say. But if that's going to be the deciding, I would go with Jamal Charles based on this additional piece of information. It wouldn't be like, my primary consideration, but my point is, like, if you're faced with a choice between two very close players and you have the time to actually look at their playoff schedule, and there's a huge difference, then I would go towards the player with the easier playoff schedule.
But by the way, we do have a comment at a chat room. I like to get to the comments, especially when they agree with me. If he agrees with you, I probably would ignore it. But James in the chat room says drafting for the playoffs is kind of like drafting to consolidate or break up bye weeks. You're going to end up passing on better players or reaching too early for players. And I agree with them on that, because it's like what you just now said right there is you have Jamal Charles and you have DeMarco Murray. Obviously, because of Jamal Charles' recent problems, injury for both these players is a major concern. They're both genius running backs, though. Then, of course, and as you get past, okay, what's their injury status? What's their teams they're playing for? Clearly, there's an easy pick here. Actually, there's not. But the reality of it is, if I decide on taking Jamal Charles because he has a softer playoff schedule, I could be burning myself during the weeks because I could end up losing because he has somewhat harder of a regular schedule. And I love strength of schedule. I'll tell you right now. I love strength of schedule. I love using it as a draft tool. But you're right. You make a good point. It's like when you have a regular snake draft, RC, you got a minute, sometimes at most 90 seconds, to decide. And to go and to start looking at every player you're looking at and then try to analyze their strength of schedule, you better know that strength of schedule before you go into the draft. And that's the last piece of advice I'm going to give here. If you're going to use strength of schedule, you've got to know it for every team. You don't got to know it for every player. You just got to know it for every team. You got to know if you're drafting Des Bryant or DeMarco Murray. You better know the strength of schedule for the Dallas Cowboys. And so RC makes a great point there with their playoff schedule. Why you're concerned about New Orleans, I'm not sure. I mean, half their defense is going to be sitting in Cabo San Lucas watching this year's season, so that's probably not a very good one. But anyways, I think you should, really be more focused, like I said earlier, on making sure you're going to make the playoffs and not making a boo-boo, like James says, that could cost you even the chance to make it that far. What do you think of the second point, as far as picking, not so trying to fill all your positions at the end of the draft, as opposed to picking the best available players that are left?
Well, I mean, James's point, remember, I mean, we're talking about a subtlety that probably isn't considered or that important to most people drafting. I mean, this is a nuance. What James's example is probably, like, for example, Darren McFadden is going around the late first round this year, and Jamal Charles is going at towards the end of the second round. James is kind of referring to, well, if there's, I'm in the late second round and I've got Darren McFadden and Jamal Charles, I'm going to take Jamal Charles over Darren McFadden. And no, I absolutely would never do that, regardless of the schedule. I'm talking about guys who have around the same average draft position, who you're evaluating very closely, who are equal in pretty much everything else, offensive lines, susceptible to injury, looking at how they're doing in the preseason, whether or not they're coming in out of shape. I'm talking about they're pretty much a dead heat. And that's why this is like, you only do this as like a last resort, and this is like an example of maybe a hypothetical case where it would actually be relevant. I mean, another example might be, for example, as you would imagine, Rob Gronkowski and Jimmy Graham are going extremely high this year for tight ends. Actually, it looks like most draft they're going around the mid-second round, both these guys. If you wanted to draft a tight end in the second round and you had a choice between Jimmy Graham and Gronkowski, they're very close. Obviously, I mean, wouldn't you agree?
I would jump all over Gronkowski before Graham, but yeah, they're very. I mean, you really can't go wrong with either one of them. So I'll agree for point and sake. Yeah. They are.
Okay, so I mean, if I want to draft a tight end in the second round, and I had these two guys to choose from, it's a tough choice. Obviously Gronkowski was unreal last year and demolished like the touchdown record, but Jimmy Graham could very easily do that this year. I mean, he's that talented. Matter of fact, I mean, player-wise, my personal preference is actually Jimmy Graham. But anyway, say you're evaluating them dead even, and and once again they're going in around the same draft position, and then the last deciding factor that you could use to choose is strength of schedule. You would say that, well, New Orleans has a slightly better strength of schedule, and I'm going to choose Graham over Gronkowski. So that's just an example. But once again, these are, there are bigger issues, and this would be just like a nuance.
I would be just absolutely floored if people actually are. I mean, it's amazing to take a tight end. The times have changed. The tight ends are now, I mean, I've been studying, obviously, the ADP and doing my mock drafts, and most of the mock drafts that I've seen, I haven't seen Gronkowski go yet, except for the third round. But it used to be that you didn't even consider a tight end until the fourth round, but now you got two tight ends even going to the second round, and that's a little weird. I'm not sure if I like that. I'm not sure if I'm going to, be wanting to fill the tight end slot in the second round, even with Gronkowski. I mean, hey, you know what? Obviously, he's the top tight end in the league, but tight ends are kind of fishy players sometimes. I mean, granted, Gronkowski and Jimmy Graham have all talent in the world. I mean, is this something you would do? Just, I know we're getting a little off topic here, but since you brought it up, if Gronkowski's available in the late second round, is that who you're going with, or are you going to go with more of a traditional pick?
I think this year is very strange in terms of those two exceptional players, because in years past I don't think they are I mean, their average draft position is the mid-second round, and I think that's unprecedented. I mean, in previous years, like when Antonio Gates was going good, and you had say a little further back than that, you had Tony Gonzalez and Antonio Gates to choose from. They were usually the top guys. More recently, before his injury, Dallas Clark was, pretty coveted earlier than usual. But that always happened third and fourth rounds, like you're saying. This year, these guys are being valued in the mid-second round. And to be honest, when you look at like what you can have a choice of, in the second round this year, just going down what's happening. You've got a rookie running back in Trent Richardson, Larry Fitzgerald. Trent Richardson is expected to be the feature guy in Cleveland, but once again, this is Cleveland. So, and also he's an unknown commodity, so he's a risk. Larry Fitzgerald, as great as he is, still has questions at the quarterback position. Cam Newton is going in the second round. Was he a fluke? Definitely not. But is he going to be able to do what he did last year with a Steve Smith that's slowing down and really no other receivers besides Steve Smith? That's a little bit of a question. Adrian Peterson, he's got a huge question mark surrounding him. Matt Forte seems pretty safe. Then once again, you've got the two tight ends going, and then towards the end, Marshawn Lynch is risky, especially since Seahawks drafted a pretty good backup behind him, and Marshawn Lynch is once again in some kind of legal problem. DeMarco Murray, Jamal Charles. So, I mean, this is what the second round is looking like. So, honestly, two of the safer guys in the second round are probably Jimmy Graham and Rob Gronkowski. But like you're saying, that is very strange.
It is. But you make a great point, though. I mean, and it's something that, I mean, if you remember a few years ago, I think in 2009, might have been 10, but I think it was 2009, where I just said I refuse to want one of the top picks. I'll take a late, like the 10th pick in a 12-team draft, and I'll go wide receivers. And I remember in one of the expert leagues we were in on CBS Sports, and I went with I think Moss and Fitzgerald. and wrapped around 10 in the course. Then when my pick came back around, I think that's when I got Fitzgerald, or excuse me, Moss. And of course, they ended up having great years, both of them. And it was, and I ended up going all the way home to almost to the championship in that game, and got upset. But I mean, I'm not going to say I did that because of those two guys. But the point is that a lot of these running backs get hurt, and I think it's insane right now when you're looking at a Trent Richardson going around. His ADP is right around pick number 7. I mean, hey, you know what? He obviously has all the talent in the world. And I'm trying to remember whether it was Alabama or Auburn he came out of. I'm trying to remember which tough school he came out of. Which one is it? I'm blanking on it for some reason. I get those two schools confused. Obviously, they're rivals. Do you remember which one he came out of? Is it Auburn?
I'm going to guess Alabama, but I'm sorry, I'm blanking on that too.
Yeah, it's one of those two. Probably Alabama if you say it's Alabama. Maybe the chat room will inform me. I just don't have his stats up in front of me, nor do I care to. But the point is, I know how good he is. I've seen him play, and to the show before we get to the players on Draft Smart, because one of the biggest mistakes that people make every year. I mean, a couple of years ago, I told everybody stay away from Ryan Matthews. He's a Fresno State boy. Not a lot of tough competition. In the WAC where he came out of. I mean, I'm down here in Las Vegas. Trust me, the WAC is a big time down here, along with the Mountain West. So, I said just give him some time to get seasoned into the NFL before you go jumping on him in the first round. And of course, he had a horrendous rookie year, at least as far as the number 1 draft pick is concerned. I mean, a number 1 draft pick in fantasy, I'm talking about. And a lot of people paid the price for him. Don't repeat the same mistake. Let somebody else take a risk on it. And I'll get you in on his one right now, RC. Let someone else take a risk on Trent Richardson. You go and you get your Chris Johnson or your Calvin Johnson. Why Trent Richardson has a higher ADP than Calvin Johnson? I mean, it must be a non-PPR league because that blows my mind. Am I crazy, RC? Am I losing it here in seeing this?
Well, no, Trent Richardson's a great player. I mean, he looks like as close to a sure thing as, they're usually...
Bama. Oh, by the way, it is Bama. Just to let you know.
Right. So, I mean, he definitely looks like an extremely talented... I mean, there's a lot to like about him. He's big and he's tough. He's got, rare ability to break tackles that you don't often see. So, and he's going to need that. He's going to need that tenaciousness to play in Cleveland. It's a tough division. And the other drawback is that Cleveland, at least they're expected to have a fairly bad offensive line again. So he's got his work cut out for him. But consistent with our last discussion, he does have a little bit easy playoff schedule, so that goes a little bit in his favor. But the larger issue is really what you're saying, and he's unknown really. It's like obviously the odds are he's going to be a productive NFL player, but a lot of us thought the same thing for Ryan Matthews when he came into the league. I loved Ryan Matthews his first year, and he was obviously a huge disappointment. Ironically, this is the year to draft him. I think he's going really high this year. It looks like he's going around number 6 or 7. But anyway, with Trent Richardson, he's not in a great team situation. I agree with you. I think unless you're in a dynasty league, in that case you move him up a bit. But otherwise, yeah, I would rather if I was faced with a decision. If I really wanted a running back in that position, I would, honestly, I'd probably take Forte, even though he's being drafted five spots lower. I think he's safer.
Let me interrupt you for a second, because at the beginning of this whole this whole dialogue you went into, I kind of heard this blah 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 blah. When you're talking about Trent Richardson, okay? You can sit here all day to me and tell me how amazing of a running back he is. And I can sit here and I can point out to you how awesome Ryan Leaf was in college. I know I'm comparing a running back to a quarterback, but that's the best I can do at the top of my head, and that guy's a nut. So, it's a perfect example in my mind. But, you can't sit here and defend taking a chance on a Trent. Unless it's the most outstanding running back in the history of mankind coming out, like a Michael Jordan of running backs coming out, I don't agree ever taking a chance. You need to have your first-round draft pick perform. That's just the way it goes. If your first-round draft pick doesn't perform, it doesn't mean you're not going to make the playoffs. I mean, guys, we do it all the time, and people lose first-round draft picks all the time. But if you want to win the championship, you need a good first-round draft pick. And if Trent Richardson turns out to be a 750-yard, 900-yard, even a 1,000-yard running back, but maybe only gets 2 or 3 touchdowns because of that anemic offense, and like you say, that anemic, even more anemic offensive line, then, you know, it's going to be really bad for you. And you're right, I'd rather go for a guy like Forte. You know what you're going to get out of Forte. As a matter of fact, I'm quite excited about Forte this year, as I have been in years past. You know, so, I mean, I don't know. I just think it's a little crazy. So I do apologize if I sounded a little bit tough on you there.
No, I'm agreeing with you if you didn't notice. I'm not saying that you should run off and draft Trent Richardson. I said that if I was faced with a choice at the end of the first round and Trent Richardson was still there and Matt Forte, who, you know, because I like to keep close to average draft position, Matt Forte is being valued about 5-6 spots lower. And if they were both there and I wanted a running back, I said I would take Forte, so I'm agreeing with you.
You know, we got Walkie Talkie. I know is one of our standard listeners from last year. He's disagreeing with me on Trent Richardson, and he's comparing it, you know, to Peyton Hillis having success there. And that's a great point. And I'm not sitting here saying that Trent Richardson isn't going to have a 1,500-yard, 12-touchdown season. I mean, that would qualify him without a doubt as a number 1 draft pick. You know, just the minute if that was the minimum he got. What I'm saying is that, you know, I've always preached this, is risk versus reward. You're going to take a large amount of risk. You know, with the running back that's going to come out, he hasn't learned how to run in the NFL yet. You know, it's a little different when you're running college ball. That's why you can run options all the time and have a great day with them. You can't get away with that stuff in the NFL. And, you know, and linebackers and defensive schemes, they're going to screw with you just like pitchers screw with young hitters or veteran hitters mess with, you know, young pitchers. You know, that mind game is going to take some time to get around, and normally it takes a full season in the NFL, even for a quarterback, to get around defensive schemes and a linebacker faking and all that great stuff. So I think the same thing happens to running backs. Some running backs, you know, obviously advance a lot faster than others. Some learn a lot faster. I'm not saying Trent Richardson can't learn fast. You know, I mean, he's from Bama. I'm just kidding. I hope there's no Alabama fans in the and listen to podcasts. I mean, I'm UNLV. I got no talking space. But the point is that I just don't take a risk. And I get the for sure play. I get the Chris Johnson, granted. That's a really bad example from last year. But I get the Chris Johnson. I get the Matt Forte. Frankly, as far as I'm concerned, I get the Calvin Johnson. If you have Calvin Johnson, let's just bring this up, and then we'll move to the rookies after this. If Calvin Johnson's sitting there, I mean, why would you take Trent? Who would you take? Pick 7, sitting right there. You got Megatron and Trent Richardson. Who do you take, RC?
Calvin Johnson is going around number 5, and Richardson's going 12. So that wouldn't even be an issue for me.
What do you? No. You got to look at I look at mockdraftcentral.com. Check them out, guys. Tell them Todd and RC sent you. I'm looking at Mock Draft Central, and right now you have Trent Richardson. Average his ADP is 7. Calvin Johnson's is 8.
Yeah, I use a combined version, which I think is probably more appropriate. So not to, you know, and the thing is, you have no idea what's going to happen. You could have crazy people in your league, you know, and they could basically, you know, draft Jordy Nelson number 4. So you have no idea what's going to happen. But in general, I'd rather use like a combined, you know, average draft position. So I'm not just looking at one. So across, you know, like, you know, multiple average drafts, what's happening is that Calvin Johnson's going around number 5 and Richardson's going around number 12. So for me, that wouldn't even be an issue. But, you know, going, you know, specifically about Trent Richardson, another thing that kind of undermines him a little bit, you know, and there's always kind of like the appeal of like the new shiny rookie and, you know, all the optimism. One thing you got to consider, though, is that, you know, at Alabama, Richardson was Mark Ingram's backup. Now, I wasn't crazy about Mark Ingram coming in last year, but he was the most highly regarded running back. And, you know, granted, this was the Saints, and they have a you know, somewhat unpredictable, strange running back rotation. But obviously, Mark Ingram didn't look very good last year. He didn't look like, you know, some powerhouse franchise running back by any stretch of the imagination. So if Trent Richardson was his backup, I'm not sure what that really says about him. So, I mean, that's another thing to consider. if you're just going to go on, the scouting reports, at least look at, look up some YouTube, footage of Richardson, see if, you really like him, his playing style. One thing that is apparent is, he's a wrecking ball, and he's, somewhat similar, I would say, he's smaller in stature, but similar to like maybe Steven Jackson in terms of running style. He's not going to run away from you, but he's going to run over you, and so there's a lot to like about him. But also do consider that even though Alabama, tough conference and they have a tough schedule, Richardson was Mark Ingram's backup.
Yeah, I mean, and you're right. We were all over Mark Ingram last year, but of course he wasn't even really being taken the first round. He was more, I believe, if I remember correctly, late second round, early third round, and he still proved to be a fantasy dud for the most part throughout the season. Especially, he did take a little injury there last year, so that kind of played into it. But and Primetime makes a point in the chat room that it is the easiest transition, position. Running back, it absolutely is. I mean, basically you have your lanes and you run in them and you make your moves. But I mean, there's running styles that basically defenses are a lot faster in the NFL than they are in college. That's fact. I mean, the speed of the game is way faster. And for running backs, when they go out there and they hit that hole, they expect that hole to be a little bit more open because of what they saw in college. It's not quite. They have to adjust. Either way, I mean, I don't even care. Obviously, we've seen running backs come out in their rookie year and have great seasons. It always depends on the O-line you have in front of you, the offense that's really, afforded to you, as far as, is the defense going to be focused on the passing game or on you, whatever. And when it all comes down to is, can that player make the adjustments quickly? I mean, look at DeMarco Murray last year. He didn't start until, I think, week 7, until he came in to even really having too many carries. And, by week 8, he was blowing it up. I believe it was week 8, or maybe might have been week 9. But whatever it was, he started blowing it up until he fractured his ankle. And, so that's an example of a guy who had 6 or 7 weeks to sit here and study the game, watch it, get a few running plays in there, obviously, and then he made the adjustments. And, but the reason why DeMarco Murray had instant success is because he's a straight up and down runner. That's the kind of runner he is, and when you're a straight-up-and-down runner, there's not a lot of adjustments you make. You just kind of bowl over linebackers, and that's why I like DeMarco Murray. I just got to keep my fingers crossed on his health. But anyhow, we're digressing from the the original conversation, so we'll see how Trent Richardson ends up playing. I'm not saying I wouldn't take him in the second round, mid-late second round. I'm just saying, if you want to take a risk, take a risk. If you want to put your whole season, or at least a good chunk of it, on a rookie running back, do it. Let's find out right now in the chat room. All you guys in the chat room, let me know, would you take Trent Richardson in the first round? I'm not saying with the 7th pick. I'm just saying the first round. Let me know what you guys say. In the meantime, RC, did you have any news you want to get to before we get to the rest of the NFL draftee rookies that we're going to spotlight?
One more thing about DeMarco Murray. One thing to consider, not that this should be like the whole picture, but going into last season, I think we both liked DeMarco Murray. Obviously there was something not to like about it, and that was really the ambiguity as to whether or not he was ever going to see the field, and certainly that was a big question until later in the season when we finally got to see him. But also pay attention to, their 40 time. DeMarco Murray, and, some players will time, they'll just have maybe some lingering injury that will slow them down. And, so they don't, at some points, you can't really just consider what they did at the Combine or Pro Day because it's not completely indicative of, their speed. But DeMarco Murray last year was clocked at 4.37, and this is a big running back. I mean, this is ideally what you want to see. I mean, there are some workout warrior guys where they just, they're track stars and they don't know how to play, and they don't have good vision. But so you also need that stuff too to be a good running back. DeMarco Murray did have that stuff. Plus, he had the best speed, I think. There might have been one guy that was a little bit faster. So, but this was a guy that 212 pounds, ran a 4.37, and Mark Ingram is 5'9", so he's short, he's compact, but he ran a 4.62 last year. So, if you wanted to use that one dimension as like a future predictor of what was going to happen, that seems to be pretty accurate. So that's just one other thing to consider when you're looking at rookie running backs.
Absolutely. All right, I'm not disagreeing with you. By the way, in the chat room, it was, I think, a 4-0 vote. No, they would not take Richardson. So we got a pretty smart chat room. We got a lot of good listeners.
Pretty cool.
All right, so any news, or do you want to get on to our we need to cover the rookie free agents and the rookie tight ends that were drafted?
Yeah, so, the big news that we didn't mention last week was, of course, everyone knows Matt Forte and Ray Rice inked long-term deals. So there's no threat of them holding out. So that's good news. So you can, maybe move them up a little bit on your draft sheets. And conversely, Maurice Jones-Drew looks like he's causing a little problem with, he may want to hold out, even though he's under contract for the next 2 years. So that's something to keep an eye on. You never really want to, especially as high as Maurice Jones is going this year. I think he's going around number 6 or 7. Does that sound right?
He's going around number 5, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I get. I'm getting number 7, but whatever. It's very high. So if he's going to hold out, you definitely need to move him down. Andrew Luck, the rookie quarterback, signed for the Colts, so that's good news. So he'll get to camp and he'll be able to prepare, which is so essential for a rookie quarterback, obviously. Marshall Lynch looks like he got into trouble again, like we mentioned. It looks like another DUI. He does not expect to be suspended for it. That remains to be seen. Once again, they have Robert Turbin right behind him. Even if Lynch, Lynch to me, obviously he was a huge surprise last year, but I don't have a lot of confidence in him. And certainly with this new infraction, he moves further down my draft sheet. I mean, what's your feelings about him?
No, Marshawn Lynch, he's a good running back when you get him at a deal. And last year, a lot of people got him at a steal, and he performed very well and, awesome. This year, you're not going to get Marshawn Lynch at a deal. And with the fact that he has his DUI, I highly doubt that he's going to avoid a suspension with his past legal problems. So I assume naturally he'll get at least 1 or 2 games. I'll also assume he appeals it and that works at all. But he's going to be looking at probably at least 2 games minimum, and that obviously is going to hurt his value. I do not see him still going around the 12th pick. Furthermore, I really would kind of try to steer clear as much as possible from the entire Seattle offense. I mean, granted, again, Marshawn Lynch could have a decent year this year, just like he had a great year last year. But, with what they're doing there, I just would, unless it's a steal of a pick, I stay away from it. And Marshawn Lynch, I'll be honest with you, I'd rather have Kevin Richardson than Marshawn Lynch. There you go. I just said it.
I totally agree. Eric Decker, obviously he's got Peyton Manning throwing to him this year. He I think, pretty safe to say broke out last year. He actually ran with, he was working out with Larry Fitzgerald. So it looks like, he's definitely trying to take his career to the next level. He looked great last year already. So, I mean, this is a player I think he definitely is undervalued this year, Eric Decker for the Broncos. Another player who is not being undervalued and looks like he should, maybe on his way to a breakout year is Ryan Matthews. Ryan Matthews, if you recall, last year coming into training camp, he was a little bit bloated and out of shape, and he still had a good year, obviously. But this year he definitely took it much seriously. He's in much better shape, and if things go well, he should live up to his very high draft position, which, as we mentioned, is around in the 5 or 6 area. Justin Blackmon, the rookie receiver that the Jaguars are counting on. It doesn't look like, I don't think he's under contract yet, and that's a bad sign. And plus, you're talking about the Jaguars' passing game, which is another bad sign. So I think many scouts kind of rated him as the top receiver. I don't see it that way at all. I think he's going to be, that in conjunction with his, he's also had legal problems. I mean, I think Justin Blackmon's a guy to stay far away from, actually, this year. He may very well go on to have a good career, but coming out of the gate, it doesn't look like he's going to be really safe. As a matter of fact, even for dynasty drafts, I think I'd stay away from him. Do you have any opinion about Justin Blackmon?
Well, I mean, Justin Blackmon's already gotten into legal hot water with the DUI himself, so I mean, I don't know what's going to happen with that. I mean, I haven't. Has anything come about with his DUI issue that he got into?
I don't know. I don't know if it's going to affect. Basically, I don't think there's any possible suspension because I think it works on a basis of it doesn't escalate. So your first offense or whatever doesn't mean as much as if you do it 3 times.
Well, so yeah, but you never know how much he's trying. Roger Goodell is trying to slap things down on players to keep them in line. So I mean, obviously we haven't heard anything yet. So odds are maybe we won't hear anything. But either way, right away when a guy enters the league and gets into legal trouble, it does concern me. But he is the most talented receiver coming out. The only problem is, like you said, it's Jacksonville, and Blaine Gabbert. I mean, how do you feel if you're going to feel good about Blackmon, then you have to feel good about Blaine Gabbert. Do you feel good about Blaine Gabbert in the second season?
Oh, geez. I mean, I felt a lot better about him going into last season, but that's just another case where quarterbacks are absolutely the most unpredictable because it's such a position that depends not just on your raw skills. Like you mentioned, Ryan Leaf from the 2000 draft, which is probably the most notorious bust in NFL history. And when he came into the league, I mean, he just had a cannon. I mean, so he basically looked like Dan Fouts in terms of his ability to throw the ball down the field. But obviously there was a lot missing from his game. One important thing, commitment. You have to look for that. But with quarterbacks, you need to be careful. They have to be extremely smart. I mean, so we talked about 40 times speed. Looking at that for running backs, certainly wide receivers and tight ends. There's another way to evaluate quarterbacks, and I'm not sure how consistent this is, but if you're in a dynasty league and you're trying to draft the right quarterback, also consider Wonderlic scores. That's kind of like the IQ test that the NFL gives, and but that's a big part of the quarterback position. I think that might be some of what Blaine Gabbert is missing. His ability to read defenses and react correctly. And so given that situation, I'm not high on Justin Blackmon. Mike Thomas is a decent receiver, but he's never going to be a number one. No, I'm not optimistic that. I would rather see, I think Chad Henne might actually win out that position.
I'm not going to say it's going to make sense, but I mean, yeah, Chad Henne obviously has, the proven skills to do it, but I mean, they put a lot of investment into Gabbert. I think that they're going to give him all the chance in the world. I mean, he obviously didn't I don't believe he got a full season in last year. He did not start the season, did he? No, I think he took over around, I don't know, maybe it was week 3 or something. But still only getting around 400 plus attempts in the year. And not breaking 300 yards. Well, I guess the 400 attempts is not too shabby, but not breaking 300 yards in any games. I mean, it's part of the system they have there. I mean, obviously, it's Jacksonville. They have a great running game there. They've been known for years having a great running game. It's just a matter of with Thomas now and Blackmon there, is that enough for him? With the wide receivers. Probably not. I mean, but I kind of like Blaine Gabbert. I mean, I think that, with his arm and the way he does play, that he can have potential. But you're absolutely right with his Wonderlic scores and, can he adjust when the defenses adjust to him? Last year, he didn't show that. Even in the final week of the season, playing for nothing, playing against a team that's playing for nothing, he had a tough time, and they ended up, barely getting by in that game against Indianapolis. So, it's out to be seen, but again, you kind of have to take a quarterback and you got to give him those first 16 games and say, here's your first 16 games. Well, he's not going to even reach game 16 in reality until the second or third week of the season. So we'll see how it goes for Blaine Gabbert, but yeah, I'm not. Just based on that offense, I'm not going to go crazy for Justin Blackmon. How about Michael Floyd out of Notre Dame? He was the first-round pick by the Cardinals, so he's obviously going to be joining Larry Fitzgerald, and that's a pretty nice guy to have on your shoulder to learn from, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not really looking great so far for, early on for Michael Floyd. This is another guy that was highly regarded coming in, to the draft, and I think most scouts rated him as the second or third best receiver. And, the receivers this year kind of fit into classes of, huge, 6'3", 6'4", powerful receivers, and then, shorter, kind of shiftier receivers. He definitely is one of those huge, powerful receivers. Problem is, so far it's not going well for him, I think, over in Arizona, where I think he's buried on the depth chart around number 4. So he's another guy along with Justin Blackmon that, in my opinion, you should stay far away from. Because he can't beat out Andre Roberts and Early Doucette so far. So that can't be a good sign. That's subject to change abruptly. So if you like Michael Floyd, keep an eye on that situation. But it seems to be a case where he's not really maybe picking up the game as quickly as they expected him to.
Yeah, I'm not going to, depth charts are nice to look at, but right now I'm not going to put too much into them because, we haven't even had training camp really fully, even start up yet. So I'm going to wait on that. I think once we see him develop and get into some preseason games, we'll see where he stands. They put a lot of investment into him, and I think they're going to want to see it go out there. And Andre Roberts, as much of as really as an athlete as he is, and the potential he has, it's out there. I was pretty high on him last year, and he disappointed me. I'm not going to give up on him this year, but I actually don't expect Floyd to actually, and either do they in the chat room. They're not thinking he's going to start either, but he can definitely wrap up the slot position. There's going to be 3 wide receiver sets out there, and Early Doucette. Let me tell you something. If Early Doucette was so good, number one, why did they go out and draft Andre Roberts, and why did they go out and draft now Floyd? Because they're not, I'm sure the Cardinal management, obviously, are thinking, hey, best available player. But they're also thinking, this is the position we need to fill. We need to get somebody with mad skills on the opposite side of Larry Fitzgerald. And obviously they feel, and I don't disagree with them, that Floyd could be that guy. It's just a matter of what will he do this year. So I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm going to leave that door open until we see him in some games. What about, let's go to Kendall Wright, first-round pick of the Tennessee Titans.
Yeah, Kendall Wright looks really interesting, and he's in a pretty good situation, over in Tennessee because they really have kind of a void after Kenny Britt, and, you might actually want to classify Kenny Britt, at least thus far, as a little bit of a void himself, given his boneheaded, off-the-field antics, and unfortunately also, I think he had surgery on both knees during the offseason, most recently in May. So Kendall Wright comes into a situation where they really need him. And he's, as mentioned, there's kind of 2 broad categories of receivers this year. Kendall Wright is the smaller, very dynamic, shifty, elusive type receiver. He's got great hands, very deceptive in open space, and very good after the catch. So he'll be, if he catches on early, he kind of looks like, you obviously don't want to make comparisons like this, but if you had to compare him to someone, it's kind of like a Steve Smith kind of receiver.
All right. No, I can see that. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought I might have lost you there for a second. We haven't had a loss yet this year. No, listen, being on that team, I'm not 100% sure where he's going to exactly fit in this year. This is a player I have to study. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not 100% filled in on everything, all the potential he has. He does have to compete with the aging veteran Nate Washington, who had a fine year last year, as fine as you can have with the Tennessee Titans, and, of course, Kenny Britt. But I think one of the reasons why they got him is insurance for the fact that they have Nate Washington and Kenny Britt. Trey Britt stays healthy, he's going to be one of the best wide receivers in the league. You know, and with Matt Hasselbeck thrown to him, assuming Matt Hasselbeck can stay healthy, that'll be to be seen. He'll probably have a pretty decent year. But this is definitely a guy, like you say, who could fit there in the slot position, and so we'll see how his the preseason goes for him. But I like him in the slot position for the Tennessee Titans. So let's go ahead and let's look at the next guy. And this is one I'm a little, I feel all right about him, Stephen Hill. But I know you're going to have a lot to say about him.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot to like about him. He really catapulted up the draft charts going into April's draft this year, and he wasn't that well regarded mostly as a function of I think the offense he was in, where they weren't really a passing offense at Georgia Tech, and I like to believe as a Jets fan maybe that's why he was under the radar, because he really didn't get thrown to as much as he would have in maybe other offenses. But the thing to like about Stephen Hill is that his measurables are very similar to Julio Jones last year, where he's a big receiver. He's at 6'4", and he runs at 4.36. At least he did at the Combine this year. So this is something, that the Jets were hoping to get last year with Plaxico Burress. Obviously, that was an abysmal failure, but they needed, a big target on the opposite end of Santonio Holmes. If Stephen Hill catches on and actually secures that number 2 position, they basically have what Plaxico Burress was, maybe not the hands part of it, but another dimension that they were definitely lacking last year, which is someone who can stretch the field. So when you have a big target like him that can also basically run down the field, he could be dangerous if he actually catches on, simulates the playbook and all that stuff. And that's always a big question, but we'll see how that turns out.
All right. Well, we have primetime on the line now, so we're going to go ahead and switch gears. Are there any other of these? We had 4 more wide receivers. We kind of covered the tight ends anyways in the first show, Kobe Fleener. But those last 4 guys, Ruben Randall, Jeffrey Aslan, Aslan Jeffrey, Brian Quick, and Mohamed Sanua. I hope I said that right. Is there anybody in particular you want to talk about before we get primetime in here?
One guy that's very interesting is Brian Quick. He was drafted by the Rams, and it looks like he might have the potential to make an impression early because obviously the Rams don't have a lot at the wide receiver position, so he's being depended on to actually maybe be a starter early on. So he's a guy to consider. AJ Jenkins is looking pretty good. He's a little bit of a smaller receiver, but he ends up in San Francisco opposite of Michael Crabtree. In my opinion, I think he has more upside than Crabtree. This is another burner. This guy runs under a 4.4. Ruben Randall is another interesting guy for the Giants, being that they lost Mario Manningham. He's a big receiver in contrast to Manningham, but it looks like he might be able to fill that number 3 role. And in that offense, if it was anything like it was, has been the last couple of years, they throw very often, and the number 3 receiver is relevant. So he's another guy. And also Ashlyn Jeffrey he was drafted by the Bears, another big target, good hands. He's another guy to keep an eye on. He actually, I think, has a chance to make an impression early on.
All right, there we go. We got a few more minutes left, so we got a couple of callers. I'm going to go ahead and bring Primetime in. Are you there, Primetime?
Hello?
How you doing, man? Just go ahead and hold on 1 second because we have another caller, and I want to make sure we get if this is a question, I want to make sure I get this in. Skype caller, you're on the air at the Gurus.
Fuck you!
Okay. That's what I kind of figured that was going to be. You never know with a Skype caller. All right, Primetime. So last year you gave us your lowdown on the Buffalo Bills. Now this year I'm going to let it out right now because we haven't gotten it myself, but I'm pretty excited about the Bills this year, both offensively and defensively. So give us your breakdown of the Buffalo Bills, and then we're going to either agree with you or beat you up over the phone.
I'm hoping you guys can agree with me here. I'm always optimistic with my Bills every year, but it seems like maybe the last 12 years I've been wrong. So this year I'm definitely looking forward to this season. Most of the moves I think that is going to be helping them may not be fantasy impact, but that's on the defensive side. Bringing in Mario Williams, Mark Anderson, that's definitely going to improve the pass rush to get to guys like Brady in the division, and hopefully beat New England twice this year. They have a young core at cornerback and defensive backs. They have a guy, Aaron Williams, and the rookie this year, Stephon Gilmore. Both that I think may step up and actually beat them up the top two corners over guys like McGee and McAlvin. Both those guys do have a lot of injury history, so I think the youngsters may push them and be actually starting this year. On the defensive side, the only thing I'm worried about is probably the linebacker core. They're led by Nick Barnett, but after that, there's not much they're working with.
Let me ask you really quickly. I mean, from a standpoint of a fantasy defense, I mean, the Bills had some great games last year and were pretty much a stud defense last year for a lot of people who picked them in the free agency. Are they going to be that much better this year, even with the fact that they got to face Tom Brady twice a year?
They played last year. They beat New England once, and they played the other one somewhat competitive. With Miami and the Jets in the division, they're not super offenses that you're going to be able to put points on the Bills, and they definitely have some, young quarterbacks, Miami and the Jets. So I think with the pressure that Mario can, produce and help young guys like Marcel Darius and Kyle Williams, they may have the best defensive four hands down in the NFL right now.
Absolutely. RC, since you guys are division foes here, since you're a big Jets fan, why don't you pile drive him with some questions on that offense? Especially concerning the passing game of the Buffalo Bills. I mean, obviously they have a lot of talent in the running back department, but let's pound him on the passing game. And I think he just kind of took a shot at the Jets. I'm not sure. I don't understand this AFC East talk.
Well, first of all, I agree. I mean, picking up Mario Williams is huge, and also, so their defensive line is pretty impressive. Now he's got Mario Williams. They drafted another guy last year, Marcel Darius, who was one of the best regarded interior linemen. He definitely lived up to everything they expected from him. He looks like he's going to be an excellent player. And then, I think they improved, like Primetime said, their secondary with Gilmore. So definitely, adding Williams was tremendous. And for fantasy terms, I definitely think, Buffalo becomes a good option after, maybe the probably the top 7 or 8 defenses are picked. I think, Buffalo definitely should be considered. The big question fantasy-wise for I think the Bills' offense, Steve Johnson is a given, and he deserves to go fairly high in fantasy drafts. Ryan Fitzpatrick, I'm not really that high. I don't think he's really considered as a number one quarterback in fantasy anyway. But the big question is really what's going to happen between Fred Jackson and C.J. Spiller. C.J. Spiller obviously, finally started to live up to the billing, and he played actually pretty well in spurts last year. Primetime, how do you see that panning out between those two running backs?
That's the $1 million question down here, RC. I don't know. It's tough to say. Until training camp comes along, I can't pinpoint anything. Going in look at the past, I may go with Freddie Jackson just because before he got hurt, he was a top 3 running back. He was considered an MVP candidate going before he got hurt. And second half Spiller, was slow at the beginning, but in the last maybe like 4 to 5 games, he tore it up also. From what I'm guessing, maybe you may be looking at a committee here that, no one wants that's in fantasy. So I'm hoping, the Bills will maybe stick with one and, roll the dice with them.
Here, let me break in here for a second. I mean, first of all, I'm just elated that, one of the main reasons why I let you guys talk so long is because I was watching the end of the Red Sox game. Are you watching that by any chance, prime time?
No, I'm tuning everything off and concentrating with you guys.
Okay, well, I just had to watch Cody Ross hit a 3-run bomb off of Addison Reed. Okay, let me ask you this question. That was in the bottom of the ninth inning, so that's the game. Who is going to be the surprise that you feel? Because, you're tight with the Bills. You're in Buffalo. You get the local news. You listen to really, that's the best information is the local information. You get the local sports talk, especially preseason. Who do you think is going to be the biggest surprise in this offense? Who's going to be kind of like we all know about the C.J. Spillers and the Stevie Johnsons and, and the Fred Jacksons and Ryan Fitzpatricks. But who's going to maybe come out and shine a little bit on this offense that probably won't be drafted but will certainly be picked up in free agency? Give me one offensive player that you really think, or maybe two if you have them.
Okay. Right now the Bills are set at number 2, it looks like, for Donald Jones. Not a huge fan of him. He's working good, but I think there's some guys a little farther down that, definitely reaches, and these are guys may have 1 or 2 games in the season. One is Derek Hagan. He seems like he's been working very well down here with Fitzpatrick. And there's another guy that's been injury-prone. He's a monster. His name is Marcus Easley. And if this guy could get things straightened out with his health, he could be a great target with his size and speed to be a number 2 receiver outside with Stevie Johnson.
What do you think about that, RC? He pulled out a Marcus Easley.
I loved Marcus Easley coming into the league. I think it was 2 years ago. He's another. He's a huge target, and he was another one of those guys that ran I believe like a 4.37, at the combine. So he was raw, but certainly when you've got that kind of those kind of physical attributes, that's someone to look at. And I totally agree. He's a guy that could be a surprise, and he certainly seems more talented than anyone that they're considering opposite of Stevie Johnson. What do you think of Scott Chandler at the tight end position? He's actually, I kind of like him. What do you think? Down here in Buffalo, people love him, and what I call him wishy-washy. He does what he has to do, but I'm not excited about him. I still don't think he's a tight end that they need to move forward. He's pretty athletic and he's good in the red zone, but he's not a guy that could stretch the defenses out and open things up in the passing game. But I guess if you're looking for touchdowns, he's your man. But touchdowns, predicting touchdowns on a year-to-year basis is pretty much impossible. So it's a hit and miss for him.
Let me ask you, I was going to bring up the tight end situation there, because obviously I agree with you. Chandler's one of those guys where when you don't draft a good tight end, you just say, screw it, I'm gonna take a Chandler and just play him, and I'll get it, just like with the old Heath Miller days, he's still there, but hey, he'll get a touchdown every other game, and that'll just that'll be fine. But you want a little more out of there. Is Lee Smith, the Marshall boy, is he gonna challenge Chandler this year, or is Chandler primarily going to do what he does best and be a blocking tight end?
That's what they're going to do with that. They're going to help their offensive line get fit some time, and he'll stay in block, and he'll work that little middle, 5 or 7 yards middle of the field, and use him as a red zone target.
All right, well, I want to ask you one more question. Where are you would you draft? And then after this, RC can ask whatever he wants to ask you. And by the way, this is our first team we're covering. Starting next week, everybody in podcast land, we're going to start going down. So we're going to cover the rest of the AFC East opening of the show up next week. But where would you draft, and where would, obviously it doesn't really matter to tell me where you draft him. Obviously his ADP would determine that. But would you draft Ryan Fitzpatrick? You're a Bills fan. You're locked in on them. Do you put Ryan Fitzpatrick this year on your fantasy team?
Yeah, I would definitely take a chance on him. He has the upside to put up great numbers. In the first half of the season, he was pretty much top three the quarterback. He had passing yards, touchdowns. Second half of the season, he didn't do much, but he was playing with 3 broken ribs, and had trouble in passing games. So there's a possibility where this guy could sneak into the top 10 this year, and you definitely get him late, even as maybe like a second quarterback, and you can definitely take a risk with a guy like Peyton Manning or something like that. And then if that doesn't pan out, you have Fitzy to fall back on.
I'm going to be honest. I mean, the reason I asked that question is I'm pretty high on Fitzpatrick this year. I mean, last year he just, he still had a pretty solid year. I mean, the interceptions were way higher than they should have been, RC. But the fact that they've improved the defense, which means he's going to be on the field more, that's the hope, of course. And it also means that they're going to be it's just going to be a different kind of game for Buffalo. And I really see him having a pretty decent time, especially in that division, when he's going to have those head-to-head matchups with guys like Brady and where he's going to need to pass a lot. I do like Fitzpatrick. I would rather have him as my backup, but, if he ends up being my starter because I don't grab one of the top quarterbacks early on, Fitzpatrick's a guy. RC, go ahead, take it away, and then we'll be done with Buffalo.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of wonder if Vince Young becomes relevant at some point this year.
Blog Talk Radio, where millions of hosts and listeners gather.